We are going to be talking about touch this week, and you should get a little bit excited because after this chapter, you are officially halfway done with the content. You can see that the venue behind me has changed. We've now moved to my office instead of my kitchen to hopefully record some of these chapter lectures. So I apologize if there's any distractions from people out in the hallway, or if you can hear any outside noise for it. So this week what we're going to be talking about is the role of touch and the positive and negative associations that are made with that. Touch is incredibly important when we're talking about social contact. The United States and American culture is a non-contact culture, and that we're kind of keep your hands to yourself. We're not high on touch. We don't like to be touched, particularly by strangers, and even by close relational partners. Our touch is still going to be limited. So we're going to talk about the importance of touch, and on page 119 they talk about this idea of touch as a part of our development. So they'll take you back to Harbaugh's monkey study, where this idea of having a wire monkey, which I'm sure you've heard about, that has food versus a cloth monkey, and the baby monkeys will actually go to the cloth monkey. This idea of comfort and warmth. The same type of features can be displayed in young children. In fact, they don't touch upon, but you may be aware of a study of orphanages in the 1930s, where they didn't touch some of the babies, they didn't hold them, they didn't caress them, and those infants actually did not survive. Not only did they not thrive, they literally did not live. That is how important touch is in our life and how impactful it is. So they go on to talk about this in relation to the role of the skin, and they talk about how the skin sends messages and also receives messages. So if you look at the color of someone's skin, right, and we're not talking necessarily about race here, but often some people are red-faced, or if you've ever been frightened or scared, you've turned really pale, right, like a ghost. So that can indicate, simply the color or shade of your skin can indicate the emotional set. Also the temperature of your skin, if you've ever felt someone's, maybe their hands, and it's not particularly cold outside, but their hands were cold, right? Their skin could feel cold or kind of feel hot to the touch. Okay, that can signify, again, their psychological state or their emotional state. Also, they talk about this issue of perspiration. This is something that you cannot control. Some of you may be kind of the chronic sweaters. Sweat normally indicates that you are nervous or hot, but some people just, they're always sweating, right? It could be in relation to health or body weight, but all of these things, once again, are communication tools, right? So the skin itself sends us messages. The skin also receives messages. So if you've ever gone up to a stove and touched it and it was hot, that message out there is received by the skin, kind of as an indication of take your hand off of it. Also, if you've ever had somebody, that maybe you are attracted to or you find to be attractive or appealing touch you, it can kind of send shivers up your spine. The idea of kind of an electronic or electric impulse that kind of shoots through us, kind of gives us goosebumps with the shivers in a positive way. Okay, that is the way that your skin is receiving that form of touch and expressing that type of emotion. On page 123, they get into this idea of the norms of touch. So who can touch? What part of your body can be touched? What does touch communicate? If we touch people, it communicates that we think that they're important, right? Or that we care about them. So when we don't touch people, people can be viewed as insignificant or unimportant. What tends to happen is that when higher status people will touch lower status people. Lower status people tend not to touch higher status people. And we're not talking necessarily socially, but if you think of just a work environment where your boss is actually going to be more likely to touch you, don't go crazy and inappropriate with that. That idea of a hand on your shoulder to support you, right, or a pat on the back versus you touching someone with more status or your boss. The role of touch comes into place when we talk about intimate distance. So if you remember from last week, I talked about the hula hoop, which some of you may have found to be awkward or inappropriate or humorous, right? But that idea of placing a hula hoop, that's your intimate distance. Who do you let inside the hula hoop? One group of people that I did not mention, although it might have come to your mind, was we let certain professional people into our hula hoop, such as doctors, right, dentists. So somebody's going for a massage or a haircut, you let them into your close, intimate space or intimate distance. That is where touch occurs. It's really hard to touch people outside of 18 inches unless you have incredibly long arms, or you might touch someone with your foot, which could be at a greater distance. But most touch occurs within our intimate space, okay? So we're going to get into the specifics in this chapter of who can touch and what parts of our body can be touched by others. Very simply, the shoulders, arms, and hands are three places that we feel the most comfortable within our culture, right, talking about the United States here, to be touched by strangers, by acquaintances, by opposite sex or same-sex partners. If you think about that, those are non-threatening areas, right? These are our direct limbs. So if you touch my legs, my back, even my head, you're getting closer into my core of an intimate touch. My arms, my hands, right, my shoulders are kind of more apt to be out there. They're going to bump into things anyway. So that type of touch from a stranger doesn't feel so invasive. Okay. When it comes to who touches us and where they touch us, they talk about this issue of gender, right? And of course, this will come into play if you are a man or a woman, your comfort level. What I found to be incredibly interesting and may be insight to you is that actually women are more likely to be touched. Now, in general, that doesn't sound too shocking, since women in our culture tend to be more affectionate or display their emotions. But the idea that a woman is more likely to be touched by a man versus a woman touching a man, I found to be a little bit counterintuitive, right? I believe in my everyday life, I would touch men, right, strangers, friends, acquaintances, more than I would allow men to touch me. But that research shows that actually women are more likely to be touched. They also show that men are more likely to touch females than women are to touch men. Okay, so again, why does that come into play? They'll talk about later in the chapter this issue of when a woman touches a man, it is often viewed as a sexual advance. So we as women, for the women in this class, are a little bit more leery of touching men because then they're going to take it as I'm interested and I want to date you or whatnot. Versus when a man touches a woman, it's more of a communication signal of dominance, which in our culture, men tend to be more dominant than women. Okay, or that's seen as a positive. Females or women have more positive attitude about same-sex touch. So it's not awkward. It doesn't make some type of inference if a woman touches another woman versus if a man touches another man. We make a lot of homosexual connotations associated with that. So women are much more comfortable with it. Also, women are then going to touch each other more frequently. Okay, so we will show more open signs of affection or displays of affection through touch than men are going to. However, opposite sex touch does occur more frequently than same-sex touch. So again, although women are more comfortable touching one another, women are going to touch men more than women are going to touch other women. Okay, and then females are actually more frequently used touch with regard to children. Again, if you go to social norms and you think about it very stereotypically and very generalized, women are seen as caregivers. So the ability to touch a child, hug a child, isn't seen as creepy or pedophile-like, which we tend to make these associations with males, which is unfair, especially if they're strangers. But even with, say, a father or a brother, right, men, they shouldn't show their emotions. That's not what we value in this society. So it's much more acceptable for women to display emotions, therefore displaying touch, than it is men to. Okay. Another issue that's going to come into play, which I talk about on page 126, kind of keeping with the trajectory, is the issue of race. Okay. Now, if you remember from last week, we talked about how African Americans actually had the largest distance between them. Okay. So they stood farther apart than did Caucasians, than did Mexican Americans. Okay. This chapter, though, talks about this issue of touch has kind of been contradictory to that. What they found is that African Americans are more likely to touch one another versus Caucasian Americans. In fact, African American men are more likely to touch each other, which is really interesting if you look at cultural stereotypes, given that African American males report being the most fearful of thought of as being homosexual compared to Caucasian Americans, right? So they have a greater fear of being called gay than white Americans. However, when it comes to touch, they are actually more likely to touch one another. But think of general things. When we talk about touch, we're not talking about, back massages or butt pinches, right? We're talking about a pat on the back, a handshake, right? Like a nudge, shoulder rub, like things like that. Not this kind of shoulder rub, but more of just a nudge. And so the general grading between African Americans may be more boisterous, maybe more elaborate, and that may be the reason why they do touch more. So I thought that was an interesting finding. With regard to age and touch, much like distance and space, the very young and the very old are going to touch more frequently than other people. Again, this comes down to who do we allow us to touch. Children might not know social norms, so the idea that they could run up and touch us doesn't seem threatening. Older people, specifically, we're talking very old people, again, they lean in to hear you, right, for this space, that idea that they would touch you, maybe they're, leaning on you for support, okay, it's not threatening. And as threat decreases, right, if you're not a threatening person, it is much more socially acceptable and allowed for you to touch other people. That ties in with this idea of status. They talk about, again, that touch is a privilege, and so a high-status person is more likely to touch a low-status person. And the high-status people are kind of the untouchables. And we have that terminology. We also have the people who have the upper hand, right? All to demonstrate this idea that high-status individuals are people that we shouldn't be touching, right? Touch is a privilege granted to people with status, and they can touch whom they choose. Don't get crazy with all this touching. I just know what you're all thinking back there. Because I am. With culture, again, we talked about this idea. Different cultures have different levels of comfort with regard to touch. Our culture, the American culture, specifically the Northern American culture, right? So we're all in Michigan, whether you're from here or not. If you're from the South, you'll probably realize that we touch each other up here a lot less than Southerners tend to. Specifically in our culture, females tend to avoid touch more than males touch, which again, it seems contradictory to this idea that females touch more. It's more socially acceptable for females to touch, yet we avoid it, right? When I say we, I'm grouping myself, obviously, in that category, because it may seem threatening, or we don't know how to get away from it, okay? The textbook then goes on page 129 to talk about the different types of touch. There's 4 different types of touch. We have the positive, affectionate touch, where those supportive, inclusion. It's the pat on the back, it's the hug, it's potentially the kiss if we're showing signs of affection. Playful types of touch, which deal with playful aggression or affection, right? So you might kind of nudge somebody, right? Or kind of punch them in the arm as like a flirting ritual. The third type is control, and that's where we use touch to kind of either gain someone's attention or use it to seek compliance from them. Sometimes we will guide people. If you've ever had someone kind of put their hand on your back to kind of push you in this direction, right, or grab your arm to grab your attention, that would be a type of control. It sounds negative with the word control, but it's simply, I need you to look over here or pay attention over here. The fourth type is ritualistic, and those are just the standard sets of touch that we might use to greet someone or depart from someone. So sometimes when we greet people, we might give them a kiss on the cheek. If you watch, we don't do this, tend to do this in Michigan, but if you've ever been out to California, they kiss, right? They do this kiss on one cheek, kiss on the other cheek, kind of like the French. I don't know if that's who they're imitating. When we leave people, we will often hug them goodbye, right? So those are ways that we would touch people in a ritualistic fashion. There's also this issue of self-touch, okay? There are 4 different types of self-touch. Self-touch is when you are using your own hands, right, to touch parts of your body. Again, keep it clean, people. Shielding is the first type, and that's where you might block out some type of noise, right? So they talk about putting your hands over your ears or a scent, plugging your nose, right? So you're touching yourself to kind of signify or shield yourself from the outside. Cleaning actions are when you do things such as picking your nose. Probably not the best thing to do, but you've all done it in your car. Probably seen all of you do it. Or wiping your face if the crumbs are on your face, right? Some type of ritual to clean your body or keep it clean. Specialized signals, right, are the symbolic. If you go back to gestures, these are the emblems, right, or illustrators where you're trying to demonstrate to people to indicate some type of behavior. So you might shush somebody, put your finger over your mouth, right, where you're touching your lips to indicate for people to be quiet. The last one are self-intimacies. And these are maybe little things that we do to kind of offer comfort to ourselves. So some people give themselves, the self-hug. If you cross your legs, right, that's an indication, right, of closeness that you're feeling. People will cross their hands together, lock their hands together, almost demonstrating the idea of holding hands with somebody else. Okay, so those are the 4 different types of self-touch. And the last portion starts on page 131, and these are the functions of touch. Touch serves many functions. It's an important part of our life. It's necessary. Okay, just have to keep it with regard to social norms, in social norms. We use touch to persuade people or gain compliance from other people. So we're more likely to kind of touch their arm to let them know we think you're important, right? Therefore, you should do what I say, or buy my product, right, with regard to selling. We also, in selling, allow people to touch the objects that they're selling, okay, or that we're trying to sell, in order to kind of allow them to say, okay, practice with this, play with it, so then you can actually go to buy it so you know how to use it. We use touch to support other people. They talk about this specifically with regard to the health profession. The importance of touch if you are going into nursing, okay, as comfort. If you have ever, given birth, or if you have been present at the birth of your children or adopted children, often, if not always, you will see women, pregnant women or women giving birth, holding the hand of their significant other, right, for support. That idea that I am in a lot of pain and I'm going to squeeze your hand so you can, feel some of that pain, right? But it's that there that I'm with you, I'm there to support you. And this is something as simple as, holding your hand, okay? That can mean a lot. Women do prefer supportive touch over men. And that really comes down to, again, the cultural belief system that men don't like to appear vulnerable or dependent on other people. So women don't mind that. So we will take your hand and we will hold it and we will squeeze it so you can feel our pain. But men don't like that idea, right? They want to be independent. We can also use touch to communicate power, that issue of having the upper hand over people, right, and communicating our status. We use it for affiliation, right, how much we like one another. If the more we like somebody, the more we're going to touch that person, right, in subtle ways. And you can think of that as those dating rituals that you go through, okay, that coyish, right, you bump up against that person, then you slowly maybe touch their hand, and then you can get crazy, but keep it PG, okay. And then the last function of touch is obviously the negative, which is that idea of aggressive touch. You hit somebody, you punch somebody. In fact, in our culture, we are really, really leery of touch. Because of the associations that are made with that and this negative touch, or that if I do touch somebody, it is seen as a sexual advance. In fact, as an instructor here at North Central, I cannot touch you, right? If you came crying into my office, I couldn't even offer you a hug, because our culture and our country is first very crazy, but at the same time, that idea that it wouldn't be a warm, nurturing, I care about you as a human being type of hug. It would be creepy and Jenny's hitting on me and that's awkward or uncomfortable. And because you never know when you might get called onto the carpet for something like that, it becomes kind of that balance of what do you see as appropriate. Again, in the end, what it comes down to is, what is your comfort level? What are your social norms? But also making sure that you respect other people's. When we talked about distance and personal space, right, it wasn't just about our own bubble. It was about other people's bubble. And people will let you know, right? Much like when you get too close to them, they lean forward, right? Or they lean forward when they want you to get closer. The same thing will go with touch. You touch my shoulder, I might pull back a little bit, right? That is a clear indication, no, this isn't appropriate. Now, you might have startled me, and I might then come back really quickly with my shoulder, but people break away from touch. So you need to be respectful of that and not keep pushing those boundaries, just like the distance boundary. So for this chapter, what I'm going to have you do with your paper is actually talk about the benefits of positive touch. Okay, so I'm going to have you give me 5 examples of in your life when you have received a touch that has been positive. And I am asking you, because I know some of you are like, oh dear, this is getting out of control, to keep it in the PG-13, right? I don't need to know about your romantic lives. Could it be a kiss? Absolutely. A sincere hug from a romantic partner? Sure. I just don't want all the extra touches that come with that. So in the paper, very simply, even though we're in a non-contact culture, I'm sure you have experienced examples of, that hand hold, that pat on the back, even, maybe the pat on the rear end at like a sporting event that you thought of as like a reassuring go team, you did a great job kind of touch. Those examples would be about. So I want you to explain the touch, who touched you, where they touched you, and then why it was viewed as positive. Okay. So I look forward to reading your papers next week. We're going to be talking about the role of personal appearance or your physical appearance. I will see you then. Have a great week.